Guys, welcome to another episode of the Surviving Your Brain podcast. Today, we're going to talk about something that is a hot topic in the culture. It is something that I am guilty of, something that I have experienced for years in my life. And I'm sure a lot of you are already there. And so what we're going to talk today is about burnout. Now, if you guys don't know what burnout is being physically, mentally, emotionally, neurologically exhausted. I remember when I was in private practice working over 100 hours a week for 30 plus days in a row, then I'd get 2 days off just to repeat that cycle over and over. And I remember at the beginning of every month, what I would say to myself is, all you got to do is get through these next 30 days. Get through these next 30 days and you'll be fine. And I was incredibly successful. I had other members of my practice that were jealous. They were like, how did he grow his portion of the practice this big? I was making really good money. And for the most part, I thought I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, right? I remember a colleague of mine said to me, this is not sustainable what you do. And I was like, girl, you don't know me. You don't know what I'm capable of. And I did that for years. And in the process, I lost a marriage. In the process, I was not as close to my sons as I should have been. My sons always remind me of this story. When kids are like 1 and they're starting to be able to walk, but they first start with like cruising. And I remember it was an evening during the winter. It was like 5 o'clock. It was already dark outside. And my son is cruising back and forth between myself and my ex-wife. And I had worked all day, came home for a couple hours, and had to go back to work a night shift. And I was going to work a night shift and then just work the rest of the day like it was nothing. And so we do this little cruising exercise with my son. And then I'm like, all right, I need to get up and I need to go back to work. I walk into the lobby of the hospital that I was working at the time. I get a phone call from my ex-wife. He is now walking on his own, no longer cruising. He's not holding anything. In the hour from when I left home to when I got back to the hospital, he had taken this giant step. And so I've told my son this story, or both my boys this story, in the past. It never fails. They bring it up at least once every 2 to 3 months about how I missed that. It wasn't the only thing that I was missing, hustling to make as much money as possible. I missed tons of family events. And I also watched as my health started to decline. I tell the story often about how I was diagnosed with kidney disease at 18 years old, while the original disease process started to come back after I had already had a transplant. Well, it came back when I was hustling and working and burning myself out. Hustle porn is a real thing. This idea that we need to give up our life and make all these sacrifices and not take good care of ourselves in order to feed other people's businesses, sometimes our own, but most of the times other people's businesses. Well, that has a devastating consequence on us in our own lives. I tell people all the time that you can't take good care of yourself unless you can't take good care of somebody else unless you take good care of yourself first and foremost. I would tell people that, but I wasn't living that. My son a few days ago said to me, Poppy, it's a great thing that you left that job when you did. And I left it 5 years ago at this point. And I said, why? He's like, because we've been so much closer ever since. What is it that you are sacrificing because you are so burnt out? How is it that it's impacting your life? Because if you don't think that it's impacting your life, at some point, you may have a rude awakening. And I certainly don't wish that for you. But I know that's what's happened with me. I know that's what happened with a lot of people that I've cared for. So burnout doesn't just impact the relationships you have with your kids or your family or even yourself. Burnout actually impacts your brain. And let me tell you how. What burnout does is it activates your sympathetic nervous system. It activates your flight, fight, or freeze response. When that happens, what that really means is that you are in the presence of danger. You do not feel safe at all. And so your body is preparing for battle. Now look, we're all built for short-term stress. Human beings are really good at short-term stress. Actually, animals are really good at short-term stress. And what you see in animals, to use them as an example, I remember watching this video, and there was this cheetah carrying its cub. And off in the distance, it saw a lion. Then all of a sudden, you saw that the cheetah's body completely changed. It got really tight, stressed, low to the ground, and it starts kind of crawling. A few minutes later, the lion is no longer in sight. And the cheetah stands back up, shakes it off, and now looks like it was back to normal, the way it looked before the threat was there. But we don't react to threat that way. Right? We don't oftentimes just shake it off. Maybe the best of us who can deal with stress really well will go and exercise, and that's their sort of version of shaking it off. But a lot of the stresses that we face, especially when we're burnt out, they're chronic. They're not acute stress that we are built to deal with. These are long-term stressors. That's how society has evolved. Bills are long-term stressors, right? Certain family dynamics can be long-term stressors. Jobs can be long-term stressors. Feeling that you constantly need to produce in order for you to achieve a goal or maybe just even survive. That is a long-term stress. The impact that has on your body and your brain is devastating. So when you are under chronic stress, first of all, that's going to increase your blood pressure, right? You've got to make sure that you're providing enough blood to your muscles, because that way you can either fight, run, or potentially just freeze. Well, your body's not necessarily making extra blood. It's taking blood away from places. One of the places that it's going to take blood away from is your gut, right? So you're not able to digest food the right way. How many people who are burnt out, and maybe they may not even know that they're burnt out, but how many people who are working long hours, working really, really hard, have GI or digestive issues? It's a lot. And they don't recognize it as a symptom of burnout. They're probably just like, oh, that food I ate wasn't so good. I eat like crap. Or my doctor says I have irritable bowel syndrome, or I'm being worked up for inflammatory bowel syndromes. Maybe you're just burnt out. And as a result, your body's diverting blood flow away from your GI tract. When your blood pressures are high, because you're constantly in this fight or flight or freeze response, puts you at risk for heart attacks, puts you at risk for strokes. Over a long period of time, your brain does not tolerate high blood pressure. It doesn't tolerate high blood sugar either. It doesn't tolerate it well. The smallest blood vessels in your brain don't handle high blood pressure well at all. And we can see how that manifests when we take pictures of people's brains. There are certain areas that are just not getting enough blood flow, and they start to become injured over time. If that injury is mild, maybe it's not a big deal. But if it becomes moderate or sort of maximized, then people start developing headaches. They start developing memory problems. They start developing dizziness. Man, you can even develop seizures or epilepsy as a result. Your body, in response to stress, will also release cortisol. Cortisol is the main stress hormone. And as a result, what does cortisol do? It makes you focus on the stressor, focus on the threat. And now you may think that that's not really a big deal, but cortisol kills neurons. Cortisol kills nerve cells in the parts of the brain responsible for you making new memories. That means that you're not able to even experience the joys in life because all you are is focused on the threats. Is that really the way that you want to live your life? Not being able to enjoy the time with your loved ones, your time with your spouse or your children because you're constantly focused on work. You're constantly focused on your bills or whatever things got you all burnt out and stressed out. That's certainly not the way that I want to live. So I told you a story before about how one of my colleagues told me that the way that I worked, working those 100-hour weeks, just wasn't sustainable, and I kind of blew her off. Well, she was right, because I think she saw something in me that I wasn't seeing in myself. She was starting to see some of the symptoms of burnout. And I know that that's where some of you guys are. You're not seeing the symptoms of burnout that are occurring in your life. You may be seeing the symptoms, you may be feeling them, but you may think that they're related to something completely different. So let me tell you about some of the symptoms that you may experience that might be due to you being burnt out. And guys, I'm going to start with you. And what I've learned as a doctor over time is that there's two places you need to hit guys when it comes to their health so that they can take the actions they need to improve their health in their life. Those two places are in their wallet and in their pants. So guys, let me tell you this. One of the symptoms of being burnt out is that your libido is going to be low. You may be so burnt out that you're impotent. And if you think that you're going to take a little blue pill and that's going to fix everything, that's not going to do it for you. So you want to make sure that you are taking really great care of yourself in order for you to be healthy and take care of your partner in every way that you want. Now, ladies, let me talk to you about some stuff. Being burnt out, one of the things that you often see is weight gain, unexplainable weight gain. You might say, oh my God, I eat healthy. Oh my God, I try to get that workout in, a few times a week, and yet I am still putting on weight. Well, I've got news for you. Cortisol, which I said is the biggest stress hormone there is, it's also a growth factor. It causes us to put on weight, right? So one of the signs of being burnt out is weight gain. Now, there's a whole bunch of other signs. You might be feeling brain fog, right? Like you can't really focus, you can't really think. Well, I already told you that you're diverting blood flow from some of your major organs to your muscles. You're also diverting blood flow from your brain to feed your muscles to be in that fight, flight, or freeze response. And guess what? This just came to me. That colleague you have that's a pain in the butt, that's miserable, well, they're burnt out too and they just don't know it. Because being irritable is a sign of being burnt out. You can get headaches from being burnt out. You can be depressed and anxious from being burnt out. You can feel low in energy from being burnt out. Your blood pressure can be high from being burnt out. Guess what? Diabetes can all of a sudden kick in from being burnt out. Because when you release that much cortisol, it's also going to increase your blood glucose levels. And you go to most doctors, all they're going to do is give you pill after pill after pill without getting to the underlying issue, which is the fact that you are spending too much time focused on work, focused on the stresses of work, and not enough time of taking good care of you. So I told you that I've been burnt out, and I want you to learn from me because I took way too long to even start to address the issues of burnout. I didn't even believe I was burnt out when I really was burnt out, even though I had friends and family telling me, hey, you might be a little burnt out here. So there were steps that I needed to take. But burnout has long-term consequences, right? I talked about how burnout impacts your brain and body. Well, guess what chronic stress also does to the brain over a period of time? It could lead to cognitive issues, right? Issues with your thinking, issues with your memory that can then develop into dementia if you don't start doing something about it. And so I thought, here was how I thought I was going to handle burnout. I'm going to hire a personal trainer, right? I hired a personal trainer, great personal trainer. She, an incredible athlete, great with people. And I would see this personal trainer 2 to 3 times a week. There were days where my energy was so low and I was so irritable that I was like, I don't even want to exercise. And she allowed me to just sit there and talk with her. There was a day I remember wearing a t-shirt that had like this big middle finger, a snake in the sort of in the form of a snake. And I got to my personal training session and I was kind of an ass. Got to my personal training session And I was like, this is for you. I was so mean and irritable and just nasty. My personality had completely changed. And so I had to start addressing things. And I had to realize that things were not going to change overnight. And so physically, I started to exercise and get myself in really good shape. Stayed with that personal trainer, started to treat her incredibly well, and apologize for the asshole that I was before. I started to eat healthy so that way my body could feel good. I started to set boundaries at work and start telling people, no, I'm not covering your call. No, I'm not taking that extra shift. No, I'm not letting you put 30 patients on my schedule today. No, I'm not going to start rounding at the hospital at 7. Oh, there's a blizzard coming into town tomorrow at 8 a.m. No, I am not rounding at midnight. Right? So putting those boundaries in place. One of the things that I tell people all the time is we spend so much time on work, right? We'll work until 10 o'clock at night for somebody else. But guess what happens if you don't do that work at 10 o'clock at night? It'll be there the next day. And guess what happens if you do get through that work at 10 p.m. at night? You'll have more work the next day. The work never ends. And so you want to make sure that you are taking really great care of you. But it's not something that's going to change overnight. A lot of times when we are burnt out, we've been doing this for months and years. And to think that we're going to change our behavior and all of a sudden that changes, that's just us fooling ourselves. I always find it really interesting, right? This idea that we're going to work essentially for a lot of people, and this is not the case for everybody, but for a lot of people, they can get 4 weeks of vacation from their jobs. So you're going to work 48 weeks, at least 5 days a week. A lot of people work 6 days a week, sometimes 7. Very few people, I feel like, work 8-hour days. A lot of people don't even take an hour lunch, right? If anything, they may throw some chips in their mouths, throw some candy, throw something quick that's not healthy. And yet we're kind of like, oh yeah, but I've got vacation next month. Like that's how they keep us, right? It's like, and I used to do this to myself. All right, get through these 30 plus days in a row, then I get 2 days off. I'll get through that 30 plus days in a row, and then I'll have a week of vacation. That's all I need to do. I need to get to that week of vacation and I'll be fine. And the reality is I would come back to the same stressful environment. It was not enough time for me to see the forest from the trees. And during that week of vacation, I had to handle my other responsibilities. So I couldn't even take great care of me during that time. And so the thing that I ended up ultimately doing, which I think is phenomenal for me and for a lot of people, is that I changed my environment. Have you ever seen a plant that you're trying to grow? You give it sunlight, you give it whatever nourishment it needs, you talk to it, and for whatever reason, it still will not grow. And then one day you decide, you know what? I'm going to move it from the soil that's here to the soil that's over there. And when you move it to the other soil, it starts to flourish. The plant was not the problem. Its environment was the problem. Its soil was the problem. And sometimes our work environment is the problem. It helps to keep us burnt out. And I had to change my work environment. I knew that I wanted to be somebody different. I wanted to be a better version of myself for my patients, for my clients, for my children, for friends and family, but most importantly, for me. So now I've talked about some things that I did, but let me tell you another thing that I actively work on every single day. And I have my children work on this also. I give them a hard time for this. We are in this age that technology is everywhere and it's expanding. We are in touch with each other through phones and iPads and computers. There are screens on constantly and access to the world, and the world has access to us. One of the things that I do is I step away from all that technology. I step away from all of those screens. I shut down my computers. I put my phone in a different room. I get on my kids when I'm like, no. You've been on your screens for way too long. Get off the iPads, get off the games, get off the TV. I go out into nature and just enjoy being in the presence of trees and sunlight and a breeze. And I've got a lake not too far from me and go walking by the lake. Technology contributes to us being burnt out because it doesn't allow us to disconnect from our work environments. It doesn't allow us to disconnect from the people that are draining us of our energy. And you have to take really good care of yourself in order to be able to give back to others. You can't give from an empty glass. And that's one of the things that I've had to learn to do. So I want you guys to learn from what I went through, being burnt out. Start to recognize the signs of burnout in you, if you have them. Start to address that. So that way you can do a much better job of being present for your loved ones, but for yourself. So that way you can be a better version of you. And that way you can evolve in the way that you'd like to evolve. So that way you can create the health and the life that you want for yourself. You've been listening to another episode of the Surviving Your Brain podcast. And I look forward to seeing you next time.